Picture this. It's 1698, and you're standing on the deck of the Adventure Galley, Captain William Kidd's ship, and suddenly the world tilts sideways. Wood screams, canvas tears. And before you can even process what's happening, Madagascar's jagged coast is reaching up to grab you like the hand of an angry god. 40 men scramble onto a barren beach. Not just any men, mind you, but pirates, outcasts, criminals, the kind of people polite society had already written off as dead. And here's the thing that should have killed them. They have nothing. No supplies. No tools beyond what they carried in their belts. Just the clothes on their backs and the knowledge in their heads. 3 days later, everything has changed. That hostile beach? It's now a thriving camp. Not just a campsite where you huddle against the elements, but an actual functioning settlement with workshops, shelters, defensive positions. It appeared almost overnight, like some kind of miracle. And then, just as quickly, when they needed to move on, it could vanish without a trace. This wasn't luck. This was knowledge. Deadly, practical, life-saving knowledge, born from the unholy marriage of European desperation, African wisdom, and native Caribbean secrets. Let me tell you about the careening camp, because this is where it all starts. When most people hear about pirates careening their ships, they think it's just about scraping barnacles off the hull. But that's like saying a Swiss Army knife is just for opening wine bottles. These camps were fortresses against nature itself, using only axes and rope, items that any sailor worth his salt would have on him. Pirates could transform a hostile shoreline into a temporary civilization. And I mean that literally. We're talking about places where desperate men created order from chaos, where the very techniques that kept them alive became the foundation of something almost resembling society. Now, the Kalinago people of the Lesser Antilles, they taught the earliest buccaneers something that changed everything. They showed them the bucan. And if you're thinking this is just a fancy word for barbecue, you're missing the genius of what's happening here. This wooden frame, this simple structure, could transform 30 pounds of wild pig into 5 pounds of preserved protein that lasted 6 months without spoiling. 6 months. Let that sink in for a moment. This wasn't cooking. This was alchemy. This was turning abundance into portable survival, and it meant the difference between life and death on voyages that could stretch for months across endless ocean. But here's where it gets really interesting. Hidden across 1,700 Caribbean islands, because yes, there were that many islands in this massive archipelago, pirate gardens grew wild with intention. These weren't some random plantings where you toss seeds and hope for the best. These were sophisticated agricultural systems that would make modern permaculture enthusiasts weep with envy. European vegetables growing alongside African yams, Native American medicines tucked in between. On Tortuga alone, 23 secret gardens fed thousands of outlaws, while, and this is the kicker, Royal Navy expeditions starved just miles away. The British Empire, with all its resources and organization and supply chains, couldn't keep their men fed. But pirates? Pirates were eating well. The genius of the turtle crawl deserves its own moment of appreciation. Think about this problem. You're at sea. You need fresh protein. But you can't exactly keep a cow on a ship. Pirates looked at this challenge and created living refrigerators. Green sea turtles, massive creatures weighing 300 pounds, could survive for months in wooden pens that were partially submerged in seawater. Months. Fresh meat whenever you needed it, just swimming there, waiting. This revolutionized maritime protein storage in ways that naval quartermasters couldn't even comprehend. Water. Always comes back to water, doesn't it? The mathematics of survival demanded it, and pirates solved this with what might seem like obvious simplicity in hindsight, but was revolutionary at the time. Old sails stretched between palm trees, feeding into barrel systems that could collect thousands of gallons during tropical storms. And tropical storms in the Caribbean? They weren't occasional visitors. They were regular, predictable, and if you knew how to harness them, they were your salvation. But collecting water was only half the battle. When water turned foul, and it always turned foul eventually, they had an answer for that too: bone char purification. This technique came from enslaved Africans who carried knowledge their ancestors had developed over generations. They knew something that European science hadn't figured out yet. Bones burned at exactly 900 degrees created charcoal that filtered out the diseases that killed more sailors than all the world's navies combined. Think about that comparison. Not storms, not battles, not scurvy, but bad water. And pirates had figured out how to fix it, using what most people would consider garbage. The final innovation might be the most remarkable of all, and it's going to sound completely counterintuitive. Marooning codes. Now, when you hear about marooning, you think about cruel punishment, right? Some poor soul abandoned on a deserted island with a pistol and one shot, left to die slowly. But pirates, they transformed this from a death sentence into a survival system. Marooned men became living supply caches. They maintained gardens. They kept turtle crawls operational. They served as intelligence networks across the Caribbean's vast waters. What should have been the end became a beginning because these men understood something fundamental. Survival wasn't about the individual, it was about the system. 7 techniques. That's what kept these 40 desperate men from Captain Kidd's shipwreck alive. The careening camp, the Buchan smoking, the secret gardens, the turtle crawls, the rain catchers, the bone char purification, the marooning codes. Each one simple enough that you could learn it in an afternoon. Each one powerful enough to save your life. Together, they formed a system that turned outcasts into survivors, that transformed the impossible into the inevitable. But here's the question that should keep you up at night. If 40 desperate men could create this in 3 days with nothing, why did it work? What happened during the next 20 years when these techniques evolved from desperate measures into an art form? How did 5,000 pirates come to dominate seas patrolled by 50,000 naval personnel? That's where this story really begins. Between 1700 and 1720, something extraordinary happened. Those 7 desperate techniques we just talked about, they evolved from emergency measures into an art form so refined, so sophisticated, that 5,000 pirates, just 5,000, dominated seas patrolled by 50,000 naval personnel. Let me say that again because the mathematics here are staggering. Outnumbered 10-1. And yet the pirates weren't just surviving, they were thriving, they were winning, and nobody understood this better than Edward Teach. You know him as Blackbeard, and the hurricane season of 1718 proved exactly why that name still sends chills down spines 300 years later. His fleet, 4 ships, 300 men, survived 3 months in the Outer Banks using interconnected survival systems that would have absolutely destroyed any Navy squadron. Not damaged, not diminished, destroyed. His careening camp at Ocracoke Inlet became the stuff of legend, and I want you to understand why. Every morning, like clockwork, crews would head out to hunt wild pigs, but they weren't just wandering around hoping to stumble across dinner. They used tracking methods, taught by Mosquito Coast natives, techniques that had been perfected over generations. 500 pounds of meat daily, on Buchan frames that stretched for a quarter mile along the beach. Picture that for a moment. A quarter mile of smoking meat. The organizational logistics alone are mind-boggling. But here's the genius detail that most people miss. The smoke itself became a weapon. That distinctive smell carried for miles across the water. Spanish patrols would catch that scent and turn around, because they knew what it meant. Fresh meat meant successful raiders. Raiders who were well-fed, well-organized, and very, very dangerous. Meanwhile, other pirate crews would smell that same smoke and come running, because it was a signal, a beacon that said, "We're here, we're prosperous, come join us." Now, Anne Bonny, one of history's few documented female pirates, and she revolutionized Buchan preparation in a way that saved more lives than all the Royal Navy's surgeons, combined. And that's not hyperbole, that's just mathematical fact. She added native medicinal herbs to the smoking process, herbs that prevented scurvy, that disease that killed more sailors than storms and battles and everything else put together. The Royal Navy wouldn't figure out the citrus solution for another generation, but Anne Bonny had already solved the problem using knowledge that had been passed down through Caribbean indigenous peoples for centuries. Charles Vane's story is where this all comes together in the most dramatic way possible. 1719, he gets marooned on a small Bahamian island. And when I say marooned, I mean left to die. He had a knife, a pistol with 3 shots, and knowledge. Knowledge passed down from 100 desperate men who had faced the same situation and somehow survived. 16 months. He survived 16 months on that island, and when British merchants finally rescued him, they couldn't believe what they were seeing. One man, alone, had survived where entire expeditions had perished. How? He constructed rain catchers from palm fronds that collected 40 gallons per storm. He maintained a turtle crawl that provided weekly meals. He cultivated a garden using seeds hidden in his boot heel. Because that's what every smart pirate did. They always carried seeds, always prepared for the worst. His bone char filtration system, built from wild pig bones and clay vessels he formed with his own hands, produced water so pure that his rescuers thought he must have found a freshwater spring. But there was no spring. There was only knowledge and the will to use it. The account of Calico Jack Rackham's crew reveals something even more profound about how communal these techniques had become. His camp on a remote Cuban key wasn't just a pirate hideout, it was a society. 87 men, 12 women, and here's the detail that really drives it home: 14 children. Children. Kids who had nowhere else to go, who had been absorbed into this outlaw community and were being taught these survival techniques as naturally as other children learned to read. They created an entire culture based on survival. Morning turtle feeding rituals, where everyone participated, where the knowledge of how to keep the crawls healthy was shared openly. Afternoon garden tending with songs that mixed Irish ballads with African work chants, creating something entirely new, something that had never existed before. Evening boucan preparation, where former slaves taught European outcasts their grandmothers' preservation secrets. This wasn't just survival. This was the birth of something unprecedented. The 1720 siege of Nassau shows us these techniques at their absolute peak. Benjamin Hornigold's pirates survived a 5-month British blockade, and the British had everything on their side. Ships, cannons, supplies from the most powerful empire on earth. And yet the pirates outlasted them. How? Hidden gardens on 6 different islands provided fresh vegetables. But getting those vegetables into Nassau? That required small boats running blockades at night, requiring navigation skills, timing, courage. Turtle crawls scattered across the harbour's quays supplied protein without requiring any supply lines at all. Rain catchers on every building collected enough water to outlast the British fleet's supplies. Think about that. The British Navy ran out of water before the pirates did. But the most remarkable detail: the bone char filtration systems prevented the yellow fever outbreak that killed 800 British sailors from reaching the pirate population. 800 dead British sailors, 0 dead pirates. Same harbour, same weather, same mosquitoes. But the pirates had clean water, and clean water meant the difference between life and death. When the siege finally ended, not because the pirates surrendered, but because the British gave up, the British admiral wrote something extraordinary in his report. He wrote that these outlaws possessed survival knowledge that surpassed anything in the Royal Navy manual. A British admiral admitting in writing that criminals and outcasts knew more about survival than the greatest navy in the world. This was the golden age, the peak, the moment when pirate survival techniques reached their absolute zenith. 5,000 men and women living outside the law, thriving in conditions that killed trained naval personnel by the thousands. They had turned desperation into mastery, turned emergency measures into an art form. But here's what's really fascinating. Here's where the story takes a turn that changes everything. The empires were watching. The empires were learning, and they were about to steal everything the pirates had created. How did outlaw knowledge become official naval doctrine? How did the techniques that kept criminals alive transform into the systems that built empires? That's the question we need to answer next. The period from 1720 to 1750 witnessed something that should have been impossible. Pirate survival techniques, the secrets that outlaws had guarded with their lives, transformed from criminal knowledge into official naval doctrine, and it started with one of the greatest ironies in maritime history: a former pirate becoming governor of the Bahamas. Woodes Rogers, former pirate, now representative of the British Crown, and he started doing something that should have gotten him fired, maybe even hanged. He started teaching Royal Navy officers the very techniques he'd once used against them. Think about the audacity of that for a moment. Standing in front of career naval officers, men who had spent their entire lives following regulations and procedures, and telling them, "Forget everything you know, let me show you how the criminals do it." The British Admiralty launched something called Project Preservation in 1725. Now, this was classified, deeply secret, because how do you explain to Parliament that you're sending spies into pirate havens? But they did it anyway, because the numbers didn't lie. 40% of naval sailors died on long voyages. 40%. Meanwhile, pirates were thriving. So they sent intelligence officers, disguised as criminals, into these outlaw communities specifically to document survival methods. They needed to know what the pirates knew, and they were willing to sacrifice their pride to get it. Spanish intelligence went even further. In 1728, they infiltrated Tortuga and lived among buccaneers for 6 months. 6 months of pretending to be pirates, of learning their songs, sharing their meals, earning their trust. And what were they after? The precise temperatures and timing for boucan smoking. They discovered that pirates used specific Caribbean hardwoods that created smoke containing natural preservatives. Natural preservatives that European science didn't even know existed. Yet, within 2 years, Spanish treasure fleets had adopted these methods, and their loss rates dropped from 30% to less than 5%. From 30 to 5. That's the difference knowledge makes. The Portuguese took a different approach, and honestly, it might have been smarter. They offered full pardons and gold payments to any pirate who would teach their naval academies the complete system of survival techniques. Not just one method. Not just the smoking or the water purification. Everything. The whole interconnected system. And pirates took them up on it. Because what's the point of knowledge if you're dead? Better to live wealthy and pardoned than die with your secrets. Then there's the story of Lionheart. We don't know his real name. It's lost to history. But we know he was a former pirate surgeon, and in 1732 he demonstrated bone char filtration to the French Navy. And this changed everything. The French had been losing 1/3 of their sailors to dysentery on tropical voyages. 1/3. Lionheart's system stopped that cold. But here's the fascinating detail. The French documented that bones from different animals created different filtration qualities. Pig bones removed bacteria, cattle bones eliminated parasites, and fish bones, somehow, mysteriously purified salt from seawater. They wouldn't understand the chemistry for another century, but they knew it worked, and that was enough. By 1740, every major navy had established what they carefully called naval supply stations. But you and I know what they really were: pirate gardens. The British alone maintained 47 of these stations stretching from Jamaica all the way to India. 47. And each one was planted according to pirate specifications that had been passed down through generations of outlaws. Medicinal herbs in the center, protected by food plants around the edges, with toxic plants that deterred wild animals forming the outer ring. This design wasn't random. This was sophisticated agricultural engineering that had been refined through trial and error by men who couldn't afford mistakes. These gardens saved the British Empire millions of pounds sterling and thousands of lives. Millions. But here's the kicker. Official histories rarely credited their pirate origins. Can't have the Royal Navy admitting they learned from criminals, can we? Better to just quietly adopt the techniques and pretend they came up with them independently. The most dramatic validation came during the wreck of HMS Wager in 1741 off Chile's coast. The ship went down, survivors made it to shore, and then something fascinating happened. The survivors split into 2 groups, not intentionally, but based on knowledge. Those who knew pirate techniques, mostly pressed men who'd been forced into naval service, but had previously sailed with buccaneers, They survived 8 months on a barren island. 8 months. Those who followed official naval procedures? Dead within 6 weeks. 36 men made it out alive, and they all testified to the same thing. Buchan smoking, rain catching, a makeshift turtle crawl using local sea lions instead of turtles, because you adapt the technique to what you have available. These methods saved their lives while their officers, educated men who'd gone through proper training, perished following the manual. Their testimony landed like a bomb in the British Admiralty. You can't ignore 36 survivors telling you that criminal techniques work better than official procedures. So they made a decision. They would officially incorporate pirate survival techniques into naval training, but, and this is important, they renamed them Maritime Irregular Resource Procurement because heaven forbid they admit these came from pirates. The knowledge got adopted. The credit got erased. The pirates got written out of their own story. By 1750, the transformation was complete. Every major naval power in the world was using techniques developed by outlaws. The careening camps, the Buchan smoking with its specific woods and temperatures, the sophisticated garden systems, the turtle crawls and rain catchers, the bone char filtration that prevented disease. All of it, every single innovation, had started with desperate men on hostile shores and ended up as official doctrine in the world's most powerful militaries. The pirates had won, in a way. Their knowledge had conquered the world. But they'd lost too, because nobody remembered where it came from. The techniques survived, the credit didn't. And as the decades rolled on, as new technologies emerged and old methods were forgotten, something tragic began to happen. The knowledge started to slip away. And by the time we reach the modern era, by the time we get to today's world with all its technology and resources, we've lost almost everything those desperate men knew. And that loss? That forgetting? It's cost lives. It's still costing lives. Let me show you how. Today's prepping industry is worth $11 billion. $11 billion. People are buying freeze-dried foods, water purification tablets, solar panels, elaborate bug-out bags, spending thousands of dollars to prepare for disasters. And here's the tragic irony. Pirates solved these exact same problems 300 years ago, using free materials you can find everywhere. Everywhere. But we've forgotten. We've completely forgotten. Let me tell you about the yacht Mignonette. 1884. 4 educated British gentlemen, proper Victorian men with all the advantages of modern civilization, found themselves adrift at sea. And they died of thirst. Actually, it's worse than that. They resorted to cannibalism. They killed and ate the cabin boy. These men were floating in water, surrounded by materials, and any pirate from a century earlier would have fashioned rain catchers, would have used bone char to purify seawater, would have survived. But these educated men didn't know. The knowledge had been lost, and that ignorance killed them. Modern preppers stockpile individual bunkers. They buy remote land. They plan for isolation. Meanwhile, pirates proved that survival required community networks. Every pirate haven operated on mutual aid principles, where shared knowledge meant collective survival. The marooning codes weren't just about punishment. They created support systems where even abandoned men contributed to group survival by maintaining resource caches. Today's survivalists are planning to hide away alone, buying weapons to keep others away, while pirates understood something fundamental. A man alone was a dead man, but a crew with shared knowledge was unstoppable. World War II gives us an accidental recreation of pirate techniques, and it's almost eerie how exact the parallels are. Coast watchers in the Pacific, men left behind Japanese lines, survived years using methods they thought they were inventing. Australian operative Martin Clemens survived 18 months on Guadalcanal. Buchan smoking wild pigs, maintaining hidden gardens, creating rain catchers from parachute silk. He never knew, had no idea, that pirates had perfected these exact techniques 2 centuries earlier. His survival manual got classified until 1970, and when you read it today, it's a pirate survival guide with military terminology swapped in. Same knowledge, same techniques. independently rediscovered because the original knowledge had been forgotten. The 2011 Japanese tsunami created survival situations where pirate knowledge would have saved hundreds of lives. Hundreds. Survivors died of dehydration while surrounded by materials for bone char filtration. They had bones from animals. They had containers. They had fire. They had everything they needed except the knowledge of how to put it together. People starved when they had access to perfect conditions for turtle farming in tidal pools, or really any kind of marine life management. Communities struggled for months when they could have created bukan preservation systems using debris fires and sea salt. The same techniques that kept pirates alive in hurricane-destroyed settlements would have worked perfectly, identically, in tsunami-devastated coastal towns. But nobody knew. The knowledge was gone. Contemporary survival experts sell courses for thousands of dollars teaching inferior techniques. Think about that. Thousands of dollars for methods that don't work as well as what pirates did for free. A modern bug-out bag costs $3,000 and provides 2 weeks of supplies. 2 weeks. Pirates survived years using techniques that cost nothing. Rain catchers made from any fabric and any containers collect infinite water. Infinite. As long as it rains, you have water. Bukan smoking requires only fire, salt, and time. Gardens grow from saved seeds that cost nothing if you plan ahead. Turtle crawls. Need only tide pools and patience. Bone char uses waste products everyone discards, literally garbage turned into life-saving filtration. These techniques require knowledge, not money. But we'd rather spend $3,000 on a backpack full of supplies that run out than learn methods that last forever. Here's the tragic irony that should make us all uncomfortable. Pirates, thieves, murderers, outcasts, the worst elements of society, they developed survival systems based on community, sustainability, and regeneration. Meanwhile, modern civilization builds its survival plans on isolation, consumption, and depletion. Pirates knew survival meant creating renewable food systems. You maintain the gardens. You keep the turtle crawls healthy. You ensure future generations have what they need. Modern preppers hoard canned goods that expire. Pirates purified water using materials that lasted forever, bone char systems that could be rebuilt anywhere. We buy filters that need replacement, cartridges that stop working, that turn into expensive garbage. Pirates shared knowledge freely because everyone's survival depended on group success. If your crew didn't know how to smoke meat properly, everyone starved. If your community didn't understand water purification, everyone got sick. So knowledge flowed freely, taught and retaught, passed down through songs and stories and hands-on training. We guard our preparations secretly, hiding our supplies, planning to defend our bunkers with force, ensuring that when disaster strikes, we'll face it as isolated individuals, ensuring collective failure while thinking we're planning for individual success. The greatest pirate treasure wasn't gold. Let that sink in for a moment. All those stories about buried treasure, about chests full of doubloons and pieces of eight, they miss the point entirely. The real treasure was knowledge. Knowledge of how to turn any hostile shore into a home, how to take nothing and create everything, how to survive when survival should be impossible. And we've thrown away the map. We've lost the knowledge that could save our lives, and we've replaced it with expensive products that provide the illusion of security. We live in a world where information is supposed to be everywhere, where you can look up anything on your phone in seconds. But we've lost knowledge that people used to pass down through generations, knowledge that was so valuable that empires sent spies to steal it. We've got more technology than any previous civilization, and we're less prepared to survive without it than desperate criminals were 300 years ago. The pirates are gone. Their havens are tourist destinations now. Their techniques are forgotten, buried under centuries of progress that somehow made us more fragile, not stronger. We've gained everything and lost something essential, and most people don't even know what we're missing, but you do now. The question is, what are you going to do with this knowledge?